welcome to the third annual series of Regensburg and Rijeka lectures that we started in the heart of the pandemic as a way to continue discussions. So it was Wolf Brumbauer, who's the director of EOS, was partially his idea, and we had quite a few successful lectures. In fact, Klaus was one of our earlier guests when he presented the beginning of his research, but I think today we'll have a final report on the manuscript, as we heard, which has already been submitted to Brill. And so I would also like to welcome my students from the University of Rijeka, Department of Cultural Studies, and it's the Introduction to Cultural History. And so they've, in addition to starting with some basic theories about cultural history and taking a different approach to it, they also have had a series of lectures from colleagues in the Revenant project, which is looking at nostalgia, amnesia, and tribulation. So basically memory politics of empire, from the Habsburg Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and also the Russian Empire. So they've had quite a few chances to listen to what's, scholars, practitioners working on issues of cultural history. And I think that the two presenters today, we could also say, are working in the field of cultural history, whether it's semiotics and different languages in the city of Rijeka, which we'll hear from Angelo, to issues of corruption and other juicy bits from the imperial legacy from Klaus. So, but before we start, and I give before I introduce our first speaker, Angelo, I'd like to hand it over to Ger Duijzings, who's from University of Regensburg, and he is also heading up this new project, seeFField, that Regensburg has gotten. So maybe, Ger, you can tell us a bit about that before we start the lectures.
Yeah, I'm not going to say very much, but I just wanted to point out, you have probably seen the invitation to this new series of Regensburg Rijeka lectures, and this is now under the banner of seeFField. So we started, it's already, I think, more than 2 years ago that we started the first series of Regensburg Rijeka lectures. And actually this has now become part of a larger project, or a larger context, I would say, in which we want to actually foster these kind of online conversations, both on the level of research, but also on the level of teaching. So, and this is actually now today, since there are so many students present, I think already a very nice hybrid format in which we are talking about research done by members of staff from both partner universities, but also students are there. And I think that's a very good thing because, I believe that these kind of conversations can be really fruitfully carried out also with interested students who have often very interesting things to say. So I think perhaps a few words about the seeFField project. seeFField is the acronym for the project name, which is Strengthening Southeast European Studies in Regensburg, a small but fertile field. And the idea of this project really is, and it's been funded by the Volkswagen Foundation over the coming 7 years. We started in July. And so over the next 6-7 years, we will be developing various types of activities. Key ideas of this project are really to collaborate more, to cooperate more with colleagues and partner institutions in the region itself. And this, I would say this event is just a good example of this. So the idea is really to kind of extend this Regensburg Rijeka format and start including other partner institutions that are part of this Volkswagen project, the seeFField project. We have 18 partners across the region, 2 partners in Germany, and also partners outside of the region. And our aim is that over the next few years to actually make this into kind of an online platform in which all the institutions can participate, present their research, and that we also will try and share and internationalize our teaching through these kind of online platforms. We've had, of course, the Corona experience of teaching online, and in spite of the fact that I think we're all very tired of having to do this online teaching, there is perhaps something to gain as well from this experience in terms of possibilities it offers to connect across geographical boundaries. So that's just a few words about the project. So the Regensburg Rijeka lectures is actually an attempt to get these conversations going with the idea that let's say the name of the event will be changed later on, because it will not be only Regensburg Rijeka. The next partner that we'll be getting on board is Sofia, the Center for the Advanced Studies in Sofia, for example. So slowly we are actually extending the network and try to make this event into some kind of an online platform for conversations around research done about and in the region between us and all the partner institutions. So that's just a few words from me, and I think we can then continue with the first presentation as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. So I think it's very exciting that we have this cooperation, and it's obviously not just the 2 universities, but as you noted, it's a network, and it'll be great to include that. And I think very strongly, and again, this is I'm talking not just to the colleagues, but also to the students. I mean, this is a great opportunity to do your research and studies in Rijeka, but I mean, think about much broader. And as we listen to the lectures today, of course, listen to the content, because I think it's very interesting case studies that we'll be listening to, but also think about the methodology as these scholars, what they, how they research, what they're looking at, what tools they use. And we'll see from Angelo, there's also this digital humanities component, which I think is very exciting, and Rijeka is developing quite a bit. And finally, like, really do think about taking advantage of your time at the university and with partners like Regensburg. And there will be exchanges. There'll be also professors going back and forth, maybe graduate students, but I think also for undergraduates there could be some opportunities for visits or summer schools and other kinds of workshops and conferences that I know that are part of the bigger picture. So of course I'll keep you posted, and I think you should also be excited about that. So our first presenter, he's actually also a PhD student, so a younger researcher, let's say, but doing very exciting things. Angelo Massaro, and he's a PhD student at the University of British Columbia in Canada, but Okanagan branch, and working with a very good colleague, Brigitte Lenormand, and on her project, Rijeka, Fiume in Flux, which we did a lot of digital mapping and made an app on the cell phone. So Angelo was very closely involved in that. And today we'll be getting a presentation that's, I think, part of the PhD research. And we can see what he's found so far, but also some of the challenges and other elements that you're still working on. And I think this will be very good for the students because they themselves walk around and operate within Rijeka. And it's just an example of all these like small, we could call them also micro histories or different ways of looking at something. And maybe this will give ideas for their own research for this class or for future work. So Angelo, please, looking forward to hearing your presentation. Can you share your, okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here, for inviting me virtually. And also, I want to thank the University of Regensburg for this opportunity. So, as Professor Pavlaković said, I am a PhD candidate at the University of British Columbia, Okanagan Campus. And this is a general overview of my work so far. And I wanted also to focus more on the methodological part, also because it can be perhaps useful for your own research, and it can be useful any level, academic level you are in, or also alternative careers path. So the focus of my work is the second post-war period in the city of Rijeka. Fiume, I'm using both the terms. Rijeka is the Croatian name, Fiume is Italian. They mean the same river, so there's an important river in the city, Rijeka, that is also an important part of the identity of the city. I'm in my work exploring the sites of memory. I will go through the definition of these sites of memory, what they are, but they are a central unit of analysis of my work. And in particular, today, I'm focusing on the oral history with the members of the Italian-speaking community, as well as some tools that can be useful for this type of research. So let's get started. These are my research goals. So what I want to do with through my research, I would like to explore the impact of Second World War regime changes over the area, but in particular the identityscape of the Italian-speaking community in the city. Another idea I have is to challenge certain, I will say, deformation of or what is like a typical analysis of the area that puts some ethnocentric elements or dichotomous readings of the past. So either like one national historiography or another is prevalent. I would like more to play with the unit of analysis, as I said before, and so also includes what is more like local. So there are like lots of narratives coming in the context of Rijeka, like humanity, humanità, or local patriotism, that I think is also important to mention during our work on this area, as well as like cross-ethnic, but also transnational. So something that was happening in the city, but could be compared to other cases, in particular in this second post-war scenario. And so in general, I want to reflect on the question of scale related to this work of oral history. And then as I mentioned before, I'm working on these sites of memory. It's a concept that was introduced by Pierre Nora in the 80s, but I would like to adapt it to a local environment. So it's a sort of test I'm doing to this specific case, and then also another goal is to expand what already is present in the context of Rijeka in terms of oral history. So to add something more and to problematize certain aspects of research over Rijeka. So this is a very condensed timeline of modern Rijeka. I'm not really going through all the main events connected to the history of the town, but I just like selected some of those that I found interesting because we need a proper like longue durée approach, I would say, to the history of Rijeka to understand all the changes occurring. In particular, I'm focusing on the, as you might expect, 20th century. So but I start from an earlier period, like seeing how the autonomy and how some municipalistic, localistic identity were already present in the city before all the violent ruptures of the 20th century. And so how these, how local elites, how local communities were confronting to these ideas of having autonomy and autonomous local rule. But I have selected as a first major rupture in ethnic terms the occupation of the city by D'Annunzio, this poet, that nationalist poet in a way, if you want to frame this way, that was the first to in a way through the occupation of the city was bringing at the center of the political discussion this idea of Rijeka as a pure, in his view, Italian city, and all the problematization of what happened there. So after this, we have another period of autonomy. In particular, there was an interesting case of Free State, a city-state, the Free State of Fiume in 1920.
Angelo, is your PowerPoint isn't changing. I don't know if that's
no. Where is what you can see?
It's just the front, the first slide still.
This okay.
So, I wasn't sure if it was still the.
Can you see it now?
Now it's changing.
Okay, I might just use this. Probably the full screen. Thank you for mentioning this. So then there is this period of like local statutes that was suppressed by annexation of the fascist regime in 1924, and then there is the period in which I am focusing on, that is after 1945. But we need to see what happened before, in particular what happened after D'Annunzio with the Italianization of the like forced Italianization of local communities, banning the use of Slavic languages, changing surnames, and changing the urban scape in a way of the area, to understand also the reaction coming after, and seeing probably the experience of Rijeka in really this framework of the violence of the 20th century. So moving next to the main debates over the Upper Adriatic that I deem to be interesting in the case of Rijeka, I think it would be interesting to connect the history of Rijeka to the main historical development of the century, in particular this age of extremes. So it's a bit of a repetition what I already mentioned before, but all these social disruptions, these turning points of the century that were marked by large-scale ethnic-based violence and mass movements, were reshaping the features of the territories, the geographies of the Upper Adriatic. And it can be true also for other cases in the, let's call it, post-imperial territories of the former Austro-Hungarian Empire. Other useful categories of analysis for this research are the concept of border fascism, introduced by Anna Maria Vinci, but also the snazionalizzazione. So before I mentioned first Italianization, first nationalization, as well as the concept of long exodus that is putting, like, is not only focusing on one moment of the history of the Upper Adriatic, but is stretching, like starting from fascism and continuing thereafter. But at the same time, we should be conscious that having only this ethnic center approach might run to some risk, might to some problems. So I don't want to underestimate, in a way, the class-based conflicts in the area, but also what is being called by Tarazara ethnic indifference, ethnic indeterminacy. So what is instead like specific to my work on Rijeka is that I want to move from all these analysis of the Italian exodus that have been produced through the last decades, and we have a lot of material on that, but we have less material. Fewer attention has been devoted to the rimasti, so those who stayed basically in Rijeka, in the town, after the changes occurring after the Second World War. So the shift of regime from the Kingdom of Italy to Socialist Yugoslavia. And my idea here is also to connect this oral history, these memories, to other contribution, contemporary contribution on the second post-war Rijeka, for instance, Marco Abram and Francesca Rolandi, but also trying to employ some different methodologies to play a bit with oral history and digital humanities tools in the case of Rijeka, and see what is happening in the case of the Italian-speaking community. And again, the concept of size of memory. But what is interesting here that I think we should use it in both a topographical and metaphorical sense. So we both have, through the oral history, places that are actually existing, so they can be part of a marker or map. We will see this later in the digital history part, but also a place in their mind, so a sort of mental mapping of this community. But going through a definition, so what do we mean by sets of memory then? Let's give a proper definition of it. So any significant entity, whether material or non-material nature, which by dint of human will or the work of time has become a symbolic element of the memorial heritage of any community. So this is what I'm exploring through the interviews. This is what I would like to understand through this work of oral history. And I found some of these so-called sites of memory already from this early work with the oral history. We have like lots of accounts on the regime changes occurring in the area. They have been called in local Fiume dialect ribalton. So these sort of turnaround, political and social demographical turnaround, this sense of spacement, of losing contact with the territory after the changes, and all the other like social policies happening, collectivization, city reconstructions, but also some geopolitical crisis between Italy and Yugoslavia at that time. So how were lived basically by the local Italian community, as well as something more like regarding entertainment, so like recreational activities in the town, the participation to the Circolo Italiano di Cultura, like the Italian circle of culture, and how schooling, what was the role of schools in kind of propagating the identity, the culture, how was negotiated to the changes coming from this ideological shift in the second post-war period, as well as, again, like this idea of humanità that I already mentioned before. So this attachment to the city of Fiume that was cross-ethnic, actually. So it was not only part of of all the Italian community. And finally, the relation between the exiles and those who stayed. So this work, of course, I think it comes with some limitations. Like I'm working with narratives, I call it them like after the event. So I'm working in 2022. So, you know, like there has been like lots of historical changes in terms of narratives, of discourses. I'm working now in an aging population living in the Republic of Croatia. I have lost, I missed the narratives just elaborated after the transition, for instance, from Yugoslavia to the Republic of Croatia. That probably would have been interesting to analyze, but I'm 30 years late on this. So, and also the population had time to kind of shift the narratives, and in general terms, I have to, to put this into consideration. The fact that those are narratives, I'm working with that, and I should have a critical stance on those. I'm mostly focusing on the Italian-speaking community for, basically linguistic constraint. I do speak a bit of Croatian, but I think would have been better if there was a sort of comparison between two corpus of interviews, and both of like Fiume-born, let's put it this way, Rijeka-born population. And then another common problem could be the risk of reiterating some, distorted narratives of Balkanism, trying to associate certain social phenomena only to a specific area. So ethnocentric perspective and non-intersectional accounts of the history. So mostly focusing on one group within the larger group of the Italian community, and not analyzing other power relations occurring within that group. And also I deem that they are a bit descriptive, both digital humanities, this acronym can be both digital humanities and digital history methods. So I could probably delve more the theoretical part of it. And also records are often now going to more like the traditional, in a way, if you want, historical research. These records are often fragmented. You cannot find some specific documents produced in a given time in the town. In terms of methodology, you might already have understood that I'm working on oral history. I'm working on two data sets. One is a corpus of 30 interviews already publicly available on YouTube, realized by Professor Vanni D'Alessio of the University of Naples and Gianfranco Mixa from Rijeka. I'm adding other 15 interviews to this database. So I'm building up a database, and I'm treating these oral interviews, these oral documents as a text. So to enable textual analysis and using the digital humanities methods on it. And the focus group is a generation board between the 30s and the 50s. So those who can, who have experienced these changes and could tell us more about how he's living through changes of regime, or at least being a minority in the former Yugoslavia. So those are excerpts of these interviews that we have so far, and I wanted to, in a way, show here as sort of big examples of what is going on with these oral history projects. So the first is about the turnaround that I mentioned before. So how old was I? 6-7 years. So I was little. I had only perceived it from mom. Dad was freed and returning home. I saw that things weren't going the way they used to be. So this perception in the family, in a really intimate context of some changes occurring. As well, we have this other part of the interview. Let's say that it was quite difficult because towards the Italians, there was a suspicious way of looking. They made us all look like fascists, even though we absolutely weren't. So also this, highlighting, examining this equation of like ethnic belonging with ideological belonging, and so problematize these claims. The comparison, for example, appear clear when you compare yourself with those who didn't have anyone else abroad. And then you saw that you had a little more, like colored notebooks. Instead, the others had simple notebooks. So also this is in a later period. We are already talking about the 60s, 70s, when there were some ties. This is one part of the sites of memory I'm analyzing. So how people from the Italian-speaking, members of the Italian-speaking community were going to Trieste, for instance, and buying products, bringing back, and like all these experiences, how were lived by the local population. And this I find really interesting, these last excerpts. Fiume has changed, but for the worse. It has lost its image as Middle European. Here, I could have used Central European, but I really wanted to use the term that in Italian was said, city, which it had somewhat lost, but which it had reconquered. And instead, after this conflict, has lost it again. It has lost it even if there are people in Rijeka who are fighting to be multinational city. So also these layers of identification, of nostalgic layers in a way, like we have both something reminding a little bit even more about Austro-Hungary, about the times of empire, but then using modern European terms, multinational, so how they are really making sense of their identity. And as well here, there's this highlight on this conflict. So the interviewee was speaking about the last conflict, one of the 90s. So how all these moments are reshaping the identity of the city. So I'm really going fast. I think I'm running out of time in some minutes. So those are the archives I'm visiting mostly. So the Rijeka State Archive, the Center for Historical Research in Rovinj, State Archives in Pazin, and the State Archives in Zagreb. I mean, if you have questions later on, I can dig more into this. Let's go to the final part about digital tools I'm using, digital methodologies. I'm working on these oral interviews. I'm transcribing them so to be machine readable, as are commonly called. And then I want to visualize. So after the transcription, I can use this platform, web-based platform, which is called Vjeran Tools. So that I can enable a textual analysis of the material I have collected, and I can have a distant reading. So basically, I'm working with all the corpus I have without going to the reading of the single interviews, but having it as a general corpus. And then I'm adding also these excerpts in a map. So I'm building also like a proper mapping as the Vjeran tools is sort of mental mapping of the key terms. This is a mapping in which there are true location of the city. So this is how it looks. Actually, it's a bit different, but my database. So I have all these different places mentioned and events in some cases, and I'm putting a location here is missing like the actual like latitude and longitude that you have to have for the geolocalization of markers, and then this is how it appears once you elaborate this data through Vjeran tools. So you have like a sort of word clouds where of course should be filtered before, so some preposition articles should be removed, otherwise creates this digital noise, how it is called. So you can see this is just a row in a way graph here. I could like play with the words what is like less important in that time, but you can see that it's all like this before and then. I'm sorry, it's in Italian, so because of the interviews, of course. So there is all these analysis to do as well. You can see there is a centrality of school. Scuola is school in Italian, but ricordo, memory, or another term that is actually not here, but I normally see it is via. Via means both like street, but also going away. So this relation with those who were like going away, the exiles. And then you have like lots of statistical elements, like what words are mostly used, but you don't see in a word cloud or fashion, but a more statistical one, and so on. So after this, then we can go to the like the mapping, the digital mapping part. For now, I think I will use this, but I found very interesting this platform is called Google Carto, is a French one, but it enables this contributive and open source mapping ideas. So like even other potential interesting parts, historians, local citizens could contribute to adding some information. Of course, this is limited now to my research, and is even like, you know, now is not properly structured, but I believe in probably in 1 year it will have more markers and will look pretty. In 1 second I will show you. And so what I'm doing here is I'm presenting the sites of memory on the map of contemporary Rijeka. Let's just go through this. Okay, this is the site. Then if we go on the map, so you have a map of Rijeka.
I don't see it, Angelo. I think you have to go in sharing screen and then switch the window, because you're just sharing your PowerPoint screen. So you have to click on the
okay.
When you share screen, click on the one that shows the internet. So when you go to share screen, it should have like
okay. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the map of contemporary Rijeka. It's built on the layers of OpenStreetMap, so it's all open source. And yeah, you have some markers. I've identified some categories coming from the interviews. So for instance, I don't know, we have the market, like there was a market in one of the main squares today of Rijeka, which is not anymore there, but is remembered by the local population. So this is text that is coming from the interviews, is actually in dialect. I will try also to put like the audio. I don't know if it's working.
Per la piazza delle Erbe, perché qua abitava questa nonna, questa nonna che era tabacchina. Essa abitava in quella casa che non è stata toccata, e mi ero sempre dalla nonna, mi piaceva guardare dalla finestra ste bancarelle, era di tutto, era frutti, verdure, di tutto era.
So yeah, so you have like these through this I would like to really show their narratives and also their relation to the place they have lived, or at least they have listened, they heard from their families. And so having this mapping that is not only in like analytic terms of the mental mapping, but is a proper mapping on the ground. So yeah, like I don't know if this will be in any sort useful to you, but it's just an example of how we can play around with modern tools to have also works of digital in a digital sense of digital history. So yeah, this is all, and thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you again so much for very interesting work, and I think it's also relevant for the University of Rijeka, and I think much broader. So one more round of applause for you, and I think I'm handing it over now to Ger, who will introduce our second speaker. So thanks, Angelo, and good luck with the work. Looking forward to the next publications and next presentation.
Yeah, let me just briefly introduce Klaus Buchenau, who's going to talk about his corruption project. I've looked up a few things in terms of, because he has been doing this for a number of years now with a small team. This is basically a project that has been looking at forms of informality, corruption, comparing Serbia and Croatia over the last 2 centuries, sort of from 1815 till the current day. Yeah, as already was mentioned, he has also been working on a book where he looks at the Regensburg, yeah, how would you call this? Aristocratic family, torn on taxes, family that owned enormous stretches of land in parts of Southeastern and Central Europe, and had other very important sort of economic activities across the region. But his book is about, I mean, to appear, or very soon to appear, with Brill, and the title of the title of the book is From Grand Estates to Grand Corruption, the battle about the possession of Prince Albert Thurn von Taxis in interwar Yugoslavia. So, and he looks at forms of let's say forms of corruption in terms of how the Thurn von Taxis house tried to influence particular decisions. I'm sure he's going to talk about that. And if you are interested to see already some publications that have come out from this project in English, then have a look at the special issue which he edited, Corruption in Southeastern Europe and Latin America, in the journal Südosteuropa, which is now called Comparative Southeast European Studies, a journal that we publish here in Regensburg, and it's open access. I would like to point that out because that makes these texts all freely available. So yeah, I would like to hand over the floor to Klaus.
No, thank you very much, Ger, for this introduction. I'll start with screen sharing. So I hope this is visible to everybody. Is it?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, so, well, I think that I sort of need to disappoint everybody who was thinking that I will say something on Thurn von Taxis today, though this was the project I have just finished. I did not really have the intention, and the plan was to do something else, that is the future of corruption studies. Why is it so? We have this Regensburg corruption cluster, which is teamwork, interdisciplinary, with history, management studies, and linguistics. And the financing started in 2020, and it will end basically next year. So we are looking for something like a follow-up. Are going to write a new application to the German Research Foundation, the DFG, maybe to the European Union. We will see this. And in the end of September, we met on the island of Cres, that's right next to Rijeka, for a workshop. And the things I'm going to talk about today is basically, well, the status of our thoughts, basically of my thoughts, but also with ideas of others that came up during the this workshop. The Regensburg corruption cluster covered basically the history of corruption, basically of corruption scandals in Serbia and Croatia. In Serbia, basically the 19th century and the 20th century. For Croatia, more the 20th century only. Then we have a linguistic project there looking at the semantic changes of the word field of corruption. So how the meaning changes and how the word change over time. And then we have a management project which is on corruption today in Croatia and Serbia in small and medium business companies. And another project on Romania in the 18th century, one more on organized crime and secret services. From communism to post-communism in post-Yugoslav states. So this is basically what we had. Now we're up to something new because all this is going to end. And maybe for the students, it is a little bit strange to hear this. You just should imagine that we are looking for, new ways where to do research and also ways how to finance it. So this is something probably which is usually not presented to you as students. Maybe you see it just as a contribution on the nexus between science and politics. Well, because now we are living in time of crisis, and maybe also the key concepts which we will have to write into our applications will change because of this. Do not forget that the issue of corruption is always, something especially interesting for politics. It is used to be seen as a policy problem. So many research projects on corruption and anti-corruption are financed by institutions which are directly politically interested in coping with corruption, such as, let's say, the European Union. The Regensburg corruption cluster, as it existed from 2020 to 2023, was created in a time of moderate liberal optimism, let's say so. We knew that there were big problems in the world, but still we sort of believed that finally this way of life might be victorious. For the first application we submitted, this had some consequences. For example, in the first phase, we had a fitting normative research question that was obstacles to formalization, that is to the rule of formal regulations and law in Serbia and Croatia since the 19th century. Here you can see like something of the mentality of the old, German historian of Eastern and Southeastern Europe, which are frequently described as deficit histories. That is, the other regions have some deficits, and we find out why this is so, like the obstacles to formalization, which then leads to informality, which then again can be dubbed as corruption and so on. And it also had consequences when it comes to the use of theories. You see, the basic theory in corruption studies is the principal agent theory. It is not uncontested. It is not the only one, but it is by far, let's say, the most dominant one. And it proceeds from the idea that the principal, which is usually equated with a state, needs to get something done, and he hires an agent to get it done. This may be the state official, but the state official cheats then the principal with a client, which may be, for example, a businessman or a citizen. So the interest of the principal of the state is to control the agent and to make it impossible for him to cheat. So this approach is always a top-down approach, that is like the top is responsible for the common good, is equated with the common good, and needs control because the bad thing is coming from the lower echelons or from the middle echelons, that is from the state administration. And this type of thinking is deeply inscribed even into the very definitions of corruption. When you look into the World Bank definition, which is the abuse of public office for private gain, you see that it's the office holders that are the problem, that put money in their pockets. So this was like the old research design. We were more or less following, though not completely, in what we did during the past years. And now we enter a time of deep crisis, simultaneous crisis, like climate, corona, identity politics, or the war in Ukraine. And I think it is not, it would not be too wrong to say this might mean the end of liberalism as we knew it, though the name might be preserved, since it might mean deep state involvement into individual lives, into the symbolic system of society, etc. All this accompanied with polarization within societies and between societies. Since the humanities are always, let's say, sensitive or vulnerable to a changing environment, means that they need to find new ways how to justify themselves. This changed atmosphere will have an effect on scientific production, but which one? To say something on the picture, I forgot about this to the right. This was just a demonstration of the polarization going on in societies. This is not far away from the place where I grew up in northern Germany. Is a picture on a farm, is a poster on a farm where the farmers say, well, we have survived Hitler, Stalin, Napoleon, and so on. We will also survive the Green Party. So the farmers, and I am from a farmer family, they were never friends of the Green Party for sure. But it is a new phenomenon that they, start off with comparing them to Hitler and Stalin. This is what I want to say with this small picture here. The changed atmosphere, as I said, will have an effect on scientific production, but which one? Well, my guess is that the ideological divisions of today will be mirrored by epistemological wars, that is, by wars between the theories, and that this will also enter the universities. Well, out of this, we could suggest that there will be prospective negative developments which concern us. First of all, we have and we'll see crisis-related semantic shifts, that corruption might no longer be problematic as such, but might become a problem solver. Because if you live, in times of, deadly dangers, which is climate is depicted as such, Corona was depicted as such, and the war with Russia is also depicted as such, then corruption comparatively becomes a smaller and smaller problem, and it might even end up becoming something that helps to solve concrete problems. So it gets a new position in the symbolic system. Examples. Look at the Corona-related grant and pity corruption. The grant corruption, for example, masks deals. I don't know whether you had them in Croatia, what we had in Germany. The deals about the purchase of the vaccines, which is very murky story, or the conflicts of interest when it comes even to allowing the vaccines to the market, which is also a classical theme for corruption research. But since the vaccines are like the problem solver, nobody seems to be interested in this type of thing. And then you see the pity corruption. On the other hand, of this social ladder, the many people that try to evade corona restrictions, mask prescriptions, vaccine prescriptions, by producing falsified documents in an unprecedented, quantity. So And also this is not really something that is scandalized in the old manner, but we sort of getting used to, well, to people cheating their way out of a problem. Or let's look at corruption as a way to flee war. You have this with the Russian mobilization, but you also have it in connection to men that flee Ukraine to get away from military service. Or another field, this time connected to, let's say, evangelical catastrophism, which finally, or religious catastrophism, which sometimes lead to harsher abortion laws, such as the United States or Poland, where you get corruption to evade abortion prohibitions. So corruption is like marching upwards. It's getting sort of normalized, and for parts of society is becoming, or for parts of the political strata, it's becoming something like a problem solver. Then another issue is the growing political polarization between countries and within societies, which may amount to conflicting versions of anti-corruption, that we lose an idea of what corruption really is, because we get several conflicting ideas. On the one hand, the liberal Western anti-corruption as we knew it, which is, to make it short, rule-based, NGO monitored, and frequently, let's say, a little bit pro-business, that it is written from the perspective of multinational corporations that would like to have transparent rules everywhere. So the scandalous thing is that if these is the fact that these rules do not exist everywhere, that you have red tape and so on. You could scandalize other things, but in the liberal anti-corruption, this was the big issue. This is what I mean with pro-business. Then you have an authoritarian Eastern anti-corruption, which is selective and orchestrated against enemies of ruling circles. An example for this type of understanding of corruption would be what Russia is doing to Alexei Navalny and his friends, that they constantly look for something that might be found in their activities that might be against the law, where they're not looking for the same things among those people who are not opponents of the regime. Well, but it's not only East and West. Also, you have the issue of general authoritarian tendencies that cover all, governments, and also the Western ones, and that strengthen the state perspective at the expense of all other perspectives. As an illustration for this, I wanted to show you this picture from a brochure that was produced during the Corona times by the German Ministry of Science, where they were creating scenarios for the future of Germany. And one of these scenarios was the bonus system, where they tried to develop a copy of the Chinese bonus system, which is usually labeled as totalitarian, for a democratic framework. And what they were basically doing was just the same as the Chinese, that is, take a number of, let's say, fields where the citizen can show good or bad behavior, give him a grade for that, and then give him an average grade for all the behaviors in various spheres of society, and then make the payment of resources, the access to resources, dependent on this average ball. So what they said finally, that the difference between what they were proposing and what the Chinese were doing would be that in the case of Germany, the Bundestag, that is the federal parliament, would introduce this law, but not a totalitarian leadership. So this was just an illustration of the general authoritarian ideas, going around in society. So the next thing is not so much about the constraints, but what the researcher wants to do in this changing environment. Basically, as you could easily guess already, I want none of these scenarios, but prefer an autonomous development of corruption studies without political interference, which is not self-evident because many of the donors for this type of studies are like also politically motivated themselves. Besides, corruption studies are never apolitical, and we scientists are not apolitical either. So what I am not proposing is like objective corruption studies, but more awareness of bias which we all have. I could imagine that it would be good to have for future corruption studies less of a Western bias and less of a multinationals bias. That is to create new corruption studies that fit better into a world that is no longer unilateral Western, or no longer like defined from centers in Western Europe or the United States. So in the end, it should be more bottom up, that is looking at concrete societies and what they understand as breaches of the common good, and less top down. In connection to that, the theoretical model should also change. That is, we should gradually replace, I think, the principal agent approach, which is pretty much related to the top-down approach, and come to notions of the common good. This is not an easy thing to do, because in a divided society, frequently there is no common idea about the common good. And this is also part of the problem, that societies cannot come to terms about ideas of the wishable. So they cannot also come to terms to who should be persecuted for breaches of that common good. But the common good approach is basically the thing that best fits towards the idea that a successful anti-corruption must always take into account the value systems existent in a certain society, because otherwise they will not work. So there shall be more context and sensitivity. And this is something that we have practiced during the last 3 years in all of the sub-projects in the Regensburg corruption cluster, but which must be further developed. But doing so, we should not overdose the post-colonial view. You know that the post-coloniality is extremely en vogue, and you can justify a whole bunch of things by being post-colonial, but it comes with dangers, because it may end in the inability to cope of a society to cope with domestic problems if somebody only rightly hits the post-colonial tune to serve his or her interests. A good example for this is the Colombian drug boss, Pablo Escobar, who was shot in 1992. But prior to that, he was the most successful exporter of cocaine from Colombia, or from outside to the United States, to the North American market. And he eventually tried to enter Colombian politics in order to rid himself of the danger to be persecuted by Colombian police. So eventually he was even elected as a member of the Colombian parliament in Bogota. In his election campaign, and this is a picture from it, Escobar was playing the post-colonial card, the typical traditional anti-American stance of the Latin American masses, and said what they want to persecute me, while he was taking drug money and distributing it to the poor to become something like a Robin Hood. He was successful with that. He finally got elected, though he never became president. But he was a typical example for the use of anti-colonial, post-colonial tropoi for very particularist and even criminal interests. So now I come to the more concrete questions: what to do, what might be the possible directions of our future research in this cluster. I think we could compare how competing geopolitical blocks, because we are living in a time of the emergence of new blocks, integrate anti-corruption into their worldview policies. This can be done past and present, because this is not the first time when something like this is happening. It happened already during the Cold War, where the communists had their very own ideas about corruption and anti-corruption, which were easy to distinguish from Western anti-corruption. And then corruption and anti-corruption in center-periphery relationships. I think that our research should contribute to a better sensitivity, how anti-corruption campaigns are frequently colored by the interests of power centers, and that a periphery may have a different look at it, a different look of what is really needed. And I think, for example, doing a corruption research on Southeastern Europe, as I did in the case of Taxis, was, for example, a way how to do this type of research. Then dig deeper into legal corruption phenomena, about big industries and legislation processes. One of my good colleagues, Alyona Ledzinova, has proposed that this should be much more in the focus of corruption studies already a couple of years ago, though not much about this has happened. But if you look, for example, at the Corona crisis and the way how the pharmaceutical industry had it very easy to create the framework in such a manner that they would never have problems. For example, the damages done by the vaccines that the states have to pay for it. This is typical. Then you do not really need corruption, because you were always on the right side of formality, because you had a possibility to influence this formal order. And I guess that the main thing might be true for the weapons industry, which is now saving us in the conflict with Russia, or with the green industries, which are ascribed being the saviors in the climate crisis. Another thing is not so original to say here, but necessary to continue working on bottom-up perspectives on civil society and anti-corruption, because in a world of new authoritarianisms, the role of society is becoming more and more neglected. One last thing I wanted to hint at was religion and corruption, which is an interesting theme. It is not yet explored systematically, though there have been occasional writings on this. Religions are very important sources of values, and they also affect what is understood as corruption. As you know, in the Catholic Church, for example, or in the Orthodox, you have the idea of heavenly patronage. That is, you pray to a saint, and then the saint prays to God, and then you get like a patronage letter, a sacral patronage, which might be transferred upon the secular sphere just to justify patronage in this life. On the other hand, you have specific religious resources of anti-corruption. When you look, for example, at martyrdom, which are the people that are ready to die rather than accept a compromise, which they consider to be corrupting their morals. So this would be a specific religious resource of anti-corruption. Then you also have the field of practices which you can explore. For example, anti-homosexual blackmailing to control the church. It's something extremely important, though hardly researched in communist times. Or, for example, the issue of church finances, which is something always interesting, but especially interesting probably for post-socialism, where church construction is frequently a possibility to do money laundering for the business sphere. What you see here on the right side is a picture from the movie Leviathan by the Russian movie director Andrei Zvyagintsev from 2014, where a provincial Russian businessman is making a bondage with, or how you call it in English, an alliance with a Russian bishop who covers all the dirty deeds of this businessman just in order to get a cathedral financed. This aroused a scandal in Russia, but I think it hit like a tune from today's reality. We can also, and this is the last slide, react to present day demands. For example, digitalization is a mega process going on in present day's world, and it will surely deeply alter forms of corruption and maybe even of what we understand by corruption. This is something not to be done by the historians, but since we are a multidisciplinary team, it might be interesting for colleagues of mine. The issue of sustainability of corruption, like the ecological theme of greenwashing, how to get the eco label for something that is not really eco, is also something we might look at. Migration and corruption, an issue not only for those working on contemporary societies, but very general, since migrants are usually dependent on informal, let's say, ways of getting things done to a higher degree than those people who already live in a stable institutionalized environment. Then the last thing, I come to the role of the historians. Well, first of all, we could say that the role of the historians is to help a society to cope with the current crisis by exploring reactions to past crises. This is why the general answer to the crisis situation. And more concretely, we could do something on corruption-producing authoritarianisms to explore how changes in a regime towards authoritarianism alter the forms and also maybe the amount of corrupt circumventing state rigorism, something that can be be done by historical examples. Authoritarian anti-corruption as a selective justice is also something that can be researched. And I started with that, for example, on the king's dictatorship in Yugoslavia, but there may be many other examples. And finally, maybe the most important thing in the background is that, well, adherence to rules is usually connected to trust that the others will also adhere to the rules, to trust that the rules are legitimate, and to trust that those who execute the rules will treat you fairly. In such a society, you can expect that people will play by the rules. So what the historian can observe is how trust is created and how trust is destroyed and what the long-term consequences are. So here I will end. Thank you very much for your attention.